Version 2's new characters have entirely thrown the existing meta set forth in version 1 on its head. In a matter of just a few months, you'd be hard-pressed to find a single aspect of 2023 still relevant in the current day. Not a bad thing, mind you, by virtue of critical new team components like Sparkle, Robin, Aventurine, Black Swan, and Harmony Trailblazer, almost the entire roster has received some semblance of a retrofit or update, which is the best case scenario to happen for power creep. New characters improving existing ones rather than completely superseding them. Unfortunately, power creep is still power creep, and a number of units have been laid to the wayside because a more stronger, more efficient, or more versatile character came out who directly supplants them in their respective fields. You can see this most evidently among the standard banner characters. While they still retain their usability and are far from inefficient choices, many of them have gotten eclipsed in some way, shape, or form. Bailu has gotten power crept as early as Luochai, you have practically zero reason to use Yanqing over Jingliu, Gepard has been overshadowed by Aventurine, Bronya hasn't been rendered useless per se, especially with the recent break meta lowering the importance of crit and valuing full turn refreshes more than half ones, but everyone considers Sparkle the DLC Bronya with more offensive capability. And with Yunli being a physical destruction character, it's highly likely that Svarog's baby will meet her match as well. That leaves us with Welt and Himeko, the adult supervision of the Astral Express. To this day, Welt is still the only one of his kind, but as discussed in my video on him, his specialty is not in high demand at the moment. Himeko, on the other hand, once considered the worst 5-star among the standard 7, at one point even being thought of as less usable than Yanqing, has not only survived the onslaught of new top meta teams, but has actually matured in value over time, to the point where she's not just the most valuable standard 5-star in the game, but a meta-relevant character, arguably surpassing a number of limited 5-stars. With her rise being so meteoric, I wanted to make a piece detailing what happened that made her go from trash to potentially top tier. See, even at the beginning of Honkai Star Rail, learning from our mistakes from Genshin, the theory crafting community at large made certain to centralize information and learn about the game as best they could before coming to any conclusions on anything. And in record time, all the data mining, number crunching, and spreadsheet slaving bore fruit, though it is easier to theory craft a turn-based game. In any case, early iterations of tier lists put Himeko in a middle position, understandably weaker in single target damage than Seela and Yanqing, but she made up for it by being a solid early to mid-game pick, especially when farming calyxes and whatnot. Not too long after Seela's release came Qingyuan, the first featured erudition character who, for all intents and purposes, was more properly equipped for that role than Himeko, signifying the first drop of market share for the Astral Express Navigator. While she is an erudition character, with her skill consisting of a blast attack instead of an AoE, and her talent being locked behind weakness breaking, which at the time wasn't a very explored criteria yet, she was seen as inferior to Qingyuan's harder hitting follow-up attacks. It's important to remember that prior to 1.6, erudition was decidedly the weakest DPS path of the three, since endgame AoE scenarios were few and far between. The first year of HSR was clearly destruction focused, ruled over by Jingliu and Lunai Danheng. Throughout the better part of version 1 prior to pure fiction, it was basic brute force tactics. Early traces of teams were in development though. Follow-up attacks through Topaz and Jingyuan, damage over time through Kafka, weakness breaking through Silver Wolf and Shui, but they were still a work in progress. In the scope of brute forcing, Himeko was definitely ill-suited for it. Her ultimate and talent were most optimal for sweeping, taking out waves of enemies. In fact, most of her actual value came from outside of her turn due to her skill mostly being a filler action. Suffice to say, things got worse for Himeko before they got better. Evaluating her solely on strength alone casted her in a less than flattering light. She was seen as too gimmicky or impractical, not just in numbers, but application. Burst attackers like Seela or units who can damage the main target while clearing mooks on the side were of greater import at the time. It was easy to visualize the ceiling of the likes of Seela given her attack style was short, sweet, and to the point. She did damage, she did more damage, and if you killed something she would do more damage again. Even units like Jingliu and Lunai Danheng, though they had conditional elements to their moveset, they were digestible enough to where you could feasibly attain their ceilings without much external support. Okay, maybe not so much for Lunai Danheng, but certainly for Jingliu. Himeko, on the other hand, was more nuanced. Beyond the nature of her toolkit being ostensibly geared towards wave clearing, she had more situational components that, back then, were holding her down, even though in the present day those extraneous factors were actually more ancillary than we gave them credit for. Heavenly Flare's condition of regenerating 5 extra energy for each enemy defeated had the potential to slash her ultimate cost down from 120 to 90 if you account for the 5 energy gain just by using it, making it fairly spammable in ideal conditions. Moreover, as an AoE ultimate, it could deal much more collective toughness damage as it can attack 5 enemies compared to a single target or a blast attack only damaging 1 or 3 respectively. Again, toughness damage back then wasn't very high demand, so this kind of positive was entirely overlooked. Victory Rush's activation condition requires any combination of 3 normal enemies getting broken or 1 elite or boss enemy getting broken, at which point she deals follow-up damage to all enemies. Unlike Jingyuan's talent, which focuses on quality, Himeko's talent, like her does, is based on quantity. The more she can spam this attack, the better. But when comparing 2 or even 3 Victory Rushes to 1 Lightning Lord follow-up, it's obvious why people saw her as just a worse Jingyuan. They were comparing the two by the same criteria, since at the time, circumstances favored brute strength. Most of her kit was initially thought of as a confusing hodgepodge of random stuff that seemed to lack any cohesion. Her A2 trace applied a small burn effect to enemies, with her A4 trace giving her slightly more skill damage against burned enemies. This was by no means adequate enough for her to be a dot-focused character, and then her A6 was a small boost to her crit, helpful but not conducive to any of her win conditions. The unorganization within a toolkit also extended to her Eidolons. Victory Rush gave her more speed with E1, she did bonus damage to enemies below half HP with her E2, her E4 made her skill stack 2 points of her talent instead of just 1 upon triggering a weakness break, and her E6 caused her ultimate to have 2 further instances of damage, albeit against random targets. Being a standard banner unit, it makes sense why her Eidolons are not as significant of an upgrade versus that of featured 5 stars, but in terms of her internal abilities and properties, Himeko is just not that strong, certainly far from the competition at the time. Even when Topaz came out at 1.4, because their mark only affected one target, it wasn't particularly effective on Himeko in light of her 1, only getting the benefit on one target, and 2, not being able to make use of it frequently given the difficulty in achieving rapid procs of Victory Rush against anyone remotely durable than a Golden Calyx mob. There was also the very real chance that enemies would die before they got broken, further worsening the consistency of her follow-up attack. All of these factors, both intrinsic and extrinsic, resulted in a lackluster presence throughout most of the first year of the game. Mind you, she was a very popular character for other reasons. I'm not going to say what those reasons are to avoid getting demonetized, but I'm sure you cultured individuals out there know exactly what I'm talking about.
Sorry. I am indeed the worst nameless in the universe.
Moving on though, version 1.6 would mark the first of 2 inflection points within her career. Second only to Herta, Himeko was the greatest beneficiary of the Pure Fiction game mode. Since Pure Fiction was essentially an endgame Golden Calyx in design, Himeko finally had a scenario to flex her caffeine-addicted muscles. To this very day, the Herta-Go combination has effectively been obligatory for any iteration of Pure Fiction hosting at least one of 2 elemental vulnerabilities, fire and dice. With almost every wave consisting of 5 enemies, Himeko had plenty of opportunities to stack up her talent, maximize her ultimate's refund, and deal as much damage as possible. Despite not having any new teammates to augment her strength outside of perhaps Ranmei, demand for Himeko shot up virtually overnight, as she and Herta could 2-shot just about every wave over and over again without much issue, seamlessly layering their respective follow-up attacks into each other. Thanks to her main DPS tool consisting of a follow-up attack, she could incidentally be fielded as a backup attacker for many different parties if the need arose. For example, the IPC team, typically more of a single target squad, you could swap out Ratio for Himeko and continue on as normal. In the event a Pure Fiction cycle were to have fire weak enemies but not ice, you could swap out Herta for say Clara or really any other AoE DPS character based on the element required, and Himeko could capitalize on both her own breaks and her teammates as well. Pure Fiction was an outstanding circumstantial and direct buff to happen to her, but things also got better for her through characters. 1.6 oversaw the release of Ranmei, a support who would quickly become a stable partner for the redhead for multiple reasons, first of which being her capacity to buff the entire team. Himeko evidently is not hypercarry material, being most optimally used in joint carry teams like the aforementioned Herta-Go. Prior to Ranmei, there wasn't a dedicated support who could sustainably augment 2 characters at the same time. Bronya did have an AoE buff on her ultimate, but her skill advances only for one person, making Ranmei the perfect addition for Himeko, especially with the 50% break efficiency supplementing her activation requirement. As a result of 1.6, Himeko was promoted from a nigh unusable character to best in slot for almost every iteration of Pure Fiction up until this point. That alone would have sufficed in all honesty. Though it's only for one game mode, the fact that she had a stranglehold over the entire roster in that game mode would have been more than enough for people to be like, okay, Himeko is good now. Little did we know that wouldn't be the only reason for her rise to prominence. Earlier I said that Himeko's many unusual components were once thought of as unproductive, superfluous factors that could have been designed more practically. However, as time passed, those quote-unquote gimmicks would make her one of the few units with a commanding presence across all 3 game modes, Memory of Chaos, Pure Fiction, and Apocalyptic Shadow, at least for now. Victory Rush's unique property of being a follow-up attack with a weakness break activation clause has enabled her to comfortably fit into not just the follow-up attack niche, but the emergent break niche as well, which has been taking the HSR community by storm with the advent of everyone's beloved intergalactic planet-destroying mass murderer. Although to clarify, Himeko and Firefly don't really have any synergy with each other. More so that break teams have been front page material for the past month and change. Besides, more people have Himeko than Firefly. To say that Harmony Trailblazer has been meta-shifting would be an understatement. As a free character, everyone has access to them, naturally making them and the teams they can facilitate quite popular. Consequently, this was another major indirect buff for Himeko, as they would be a second support capable of accelerating her talent's rate of application. To start, Harmony MC's A4 trace enables them to deal fairly significant toughness damage to enemies, lending itself to more weakness breaks, especially when combined with Ranmei's break efficiency. But what really solidifies this party for Himeko is super break damage. Remember, attacks like Victory Rush and Heavenly Flare are not known for their burst, rather their frequency of activation. And as you know, break teams heavily favor frequency on account of the main component mattering to its calculation being toughness damage. So while Himeko's ultimate and talent don't have the highest base numbers, what they do have are the same break numbers as the abilities of her peers, and it bears repeating that her skills also a blast attack, dealing high toughness damage to her main target and adjacent ones, which does raise the possibility of chaining Victory Rush into another Victory Rush. Super break damage gets added onto every instance of toughness damage for Himeko, resolving the issue of her DPS being too suboptimal outside of wave battles. Pairing up Ranmei with Harmony Trailblazer effectively makes anyone with a lot of toughness reducing attacks a viable DPS. How Himeko benefits more than most others is the activation requirement of Victory Rush. For so long, it was seen as a negative thing. Breaking toughness was difficult to pull off consistently compared to easier or more assured activation requirements like the ones on Jingyuan, Ratio, and Herta. But nowadays, being reliant on breaks has become a positive thing, since that's what your party wants to do anyway. The result of this is that Himeko has managed to actually become a competitive choice for the first iteration of APO Shadow and the most recent MOC as well. Super break damage has given her the extra DPS to actually kill stuff quickly. In addition, now that she's armed with multiple ways to break toughness gauges at a faster rate, that also increases her uptime. I initially thought APO Shadow was going to be purely isolated targets, as in just a single enemy with no minions or ads, but it turns out APO Shadow is not that different from MOC, and most bosses do spawn minions and whatnot after all, but that ends up being no skin off Himeko's back given she's an AoE character. Now, I'm aware that Harmony, MC, and Ranmei are sort of a cover-all pairing that busts anyone who remotely cares about weakness breaks and stuff, but considering we're approaching this video in the context of all the standard banner units and how far Himeko has come, it's a really cool series of events. When Sparkle came out, there were talks about how Jingyuan was the most buffed character in Honkai Star Rail, and for a time that was true. Having gained access to valuable new teammates like Sparkle, Fushuan, and Ranmei, no one can deny that Mr. Dr. Professor General Jingyuan has gotten his fair share of improvements, but when you look at where he started versus where he ended up and compare that to the sheer 180 that Himeko pulled, from debatably bottom 2 of all 5 stars to now potentially outclassing multiple featured men at 5-star characters, at least circumstantially, I'd go on record to say Himeko is the most buffed character in Honkai Star Rail, and the best part, she still has more room for growth. Enter Jade. After all, mommy's gotta stick together, am I right? So, we all know how strong Herta is. In this scenario, Jade is also a great partner to have with Himeko in place of Herta for pure fiction in the event you run into perhaps a fire and quantum weakness combo instead of fire and ice, or you can honestly use her even if there is no quantum weakness. Her ability to boost the speed of one party member and apply a follow-up attack for said party member to every target they strike pairs fantastically with anyone who damages many targets many times. Himeko does exactly that. She can turbo spam damage on them, and then Jade will turbo spam damage as well. So instead of Herta, you can go Jade, and as a bonus, since Jade's a 5-star character, she expectedly does more damage than Herta. All in all, Himeko can take advantage of both the follow-up attack niche and the break damage niche, the two engines with the highest future proofing in the game right now. Technically, if we really want to cope, she still has damage over time in her kit courtesy of A2 and A4, so who knows, maybe if we pray hard enough she might sneak into damage over time as well. But point being, Himeko has cemented herself as the best 5-star to loser 50-50 to, which in hindsight makes me glad I got so many of her last year. If I recall, my Himeko is E4, which is possibly her best Eidolon thanks to an extra stack on Victory Rush. It's kind of fascinating how accidental this all feels. There's no way the developers are planning this far ahead. I can understand pure fiction, but for her to also stumble into break teams, it's almost too good to be true. Anyway, that concludes my recount of how Himeko went from trash to top tier in Honkai Star Rail. I hope you guys enjoyed watching as much as I enjoyed writing this. Himeko is my favorite 5-star character and is honestly one of my favorite characters overall next to Tinyun, so I've been pleasantly surprised to see how she developed over the past year and change. Let me know your thoughts on Himeko in the comments down below if you think there's anything I forgot to mention. But for now, if you had a good time, a like and subscribe would be much appreciated. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at Vars, join my Discord server, and check out my other What Happened To episodes if you haven't yet. Till next time though, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.